night was June 4th, 1994. A 23-year-old male was driving the dirt back roads of Oklahoma. He was going down the road, heading home after a long day in the field. Farming had just started, and the days ahead in preparing the fields were long and miserable. Luckily, farmers had a small radio somewhere on their tractors. The first few stars had begun to litter the gloomy sky ahead. The radio station was just audible. The farmer was unwinding after a hot day. He had a towel wrapped around his shoulders that he had pulled out of the cooler moments before. From what the police report said, the man was going at a really fast speed before he lost control and flipped and rolled several times before coming to a stop on its side. When the officers came to the scene after being called by a local, the local didn't even give a name or anything and wasn't even there when the police arrived. From the information I could drag out of the reluctant officer was that they had found a man 20 feet or so from his truck and had been trampled on by something. More than likely a deer, because those were the tracks that were around the body. Sit and listen because I have something to tell you. The legend of the deer woman has many origins, but in this story's case, it was the local lore in Oklahoma. There was a woman that was raped and then just left. Her body had been beaten through the horrible ordeal, and unbeknownst to the worthless piece of scum that is allowed to walk on this earth, didn't see a group of deer surrounding him and the woman. After the man had gotten up and started to walk away, the deer started talking to each other, and grunts were growing louder and louder. The deer knew that there was something bad with this man, this human that should die. As the grunts and deer chatter that surrounded the man's ears, he fell to his knees. The deer started to close in on him. As they reached him, they all started wailing and screaming, and then they began to make this man a miserable blob. When they were done with him, their hoofs tore through his clothes, at first breaking the bones in the process. Some of the determined deer were biting at the man's face and taking turns doing it. As all of this was happening, the woman lay there broken and battered and bleeding, as she felt a horrible pain in her belly, as if something had been ruptured and she might have been bleeding internally. It's a miracle she didn't pass out during his outraged attack. As the life was ebbing out of her body, the biggest deer with the huge rack walked slowly over to her. He started to lick her wounds and grunted, and what seemed like her crying sound. She had no idea what was going on and why this deer was paying attention to her. She just wanted someone to come and rescue her from this nightmare. No one would come, only the group of deer. As her mind wanders and she fades in and out of consciousness, she has flashes of the other deer making a circle around her and chanting in their own language. She blacks out. The woman feels the warmth of the morning sun on her face, and she slowly opens her eyes. The deer were gone. Her vision was blurry, and she ached all over, it seemed. But as she was looking around, barely moving her head, she could see a bunch of tracks around her, and she turned her body to where she could kneel and eventually stand. She makes her way onto her knees and sits back on her feet. She scans the area. Her eye comes down on the lifeless goo that is almost before her. She retches, and when she is finished, she wipes the spittle away from her mouth with her arm. She grunts as she starts to stand. She looks at her body, and as she is standing, trying to make sure that there isn't any broken bones, she had to find her way to someone's house so she could go to the doctor. She raised her shirt to see if there was any internal bleeding happening. Her skin was the same fried red gold that the rest of her is. There's a small creek nearby. She began walking over to where she thought the stream was. She was trying to listen out for it, but she had a horrible ringing in her ears. She walked for another minute or so and could finally hear the stream ahead. She arrives to the creek's edge and looks at her reflection in the water. She looked normal except for this brownish gray streak in the front of her hair. and it seems as if the whites in her eyes were gone as well. She reaches down to the clear, cool water and grabs 2 handfuls and promptly pours it over her face. She repeats. She takes another look into the water, and as she looks closer, she starts to notice subtle differences in her appearance. She doesn't know what to think of this. As she looks at the rest of her body, she sees that she looks normal, just feels different, kind of like being in someone else's skin. She turns and tries to figure out where she is, and then it dawns on her. She was about half a mile from a house. Maybe they could help. As she makes her way to the road, and down about half a mile, she starts to feel better and better. She turned onto a long driveway to the small painted house with the red roof. She walks to the front porch and then to the door. She knocks. She waits a few moments. The door slowly creaks open and an old woman peers through the crack of the door. "What do you want?" the old woman says, suspiciously through the door. "I need help. I was molested last night and I need to get to the doctor." The old woman looked at the woman on the porch, up and down, and closed the door. A second later, the door opened up. The old woman held the door open for the young woman to walk through. They both walked inside, and the old woman shut the door kind of hard and locked it. "I don't have anyone else here," the old woman says, "but I do have an old carriage my husband left me. I'm not really great at driving, but I can take you into town to see the doctor." The young woman looked pleased. "Yes, thank you," she said. "Let me get my purse and we can go to town." The old woman grabbed her bag that was sitting on the kitchen table. She ushered the young woman to the door. They got in an old and dust-riddled car, and it even took a few times for it to crank properly. Spitting and sputtering their way to town, what seemed like a lifetime, they finally made it. As the old woman drove up to the doctor's office, the car lurched forward and died. "Do you need me to find someone to help you get it started again?" the young woman asked. "Oh, no," said the old woman. "I can manage." "Well, thank you so much for your help." You're welcome. Now take care of yourself, Missy." "I will," she said. As she shut the car door, she walked over to the office door and entered. She walks over to the desk near the entrance and was promptly asked what she needed. And the young woman told her of the situation that just played out. She was told by the nurse that it would only be a few minutes. As the nurse walked into the back room, the young woman started to pace back and forth. Seconds later, the doctor comes through the door, following the nurse. He asked to see what he could do for her. She told him of what had happened the night before. He welcomed her into the exam room, and by the end of the exam, he had a puzzled look on his face. There seems to be nothing wrong with this woman. Sure, there was blood on her clothes and skin, but there's nothing physically wrong, and he had told her that there was nothing that he could do. The young woman decided that she was going to walk back home. Or should she? Because it seemed that the doctor didn't believe her, so then why should her family? She thanked the nurse and the doctor for their time and left as quickly as she could. As she started walking down the road, she began to feel a rumble in her stomach. She was hungry and really thirsty. She only had a little bit of money, so she headed to the nearest place that was selling some kind of breakfast and got what she could with the little she had. And every bit of that food and drink seemed to give her new life. She felt better and more awake and more alert. It seemed that the lights were a bit too bright. Something odd was happening, and she felt it but didn't know what to do or how to understand it. A while later, while she was walking back to the long dirt road, her mind wandered and wandered, and it kept going through everything that happened the night before. What was up with all those deer? And why did they help me? There were no answers. By the time she got home, she kept feeling that her body and mind were shaping into something different and became more drawn into her own mind. She had told her family of the nightmare that unfolded the night before, and they were silent and shocked, and they had very little words for her, but words that they did have were comforting. Although she didn't tell them exactly what happened, leaving out the deer chanting and stomping to predator into a jelly of a human. She felt like her family could understand what happened to her because they were very superstitious. The rest of the day seemed to go by as if it were a dream. She even tried to take a nap, and her dreams were filled with terror and deer chantings. It's as if she were taken right back to her own personal hell. She woke up in a sweat. She sat up in bed. In a few moments she gathered herself. She went the rest of the day lost in 3 thoughts and stayed at her room until the night. She got herself ready to go to sleep and lay down with the twisting and swirling images of deer and ground and that horrible face that will always haunt her. The young woman wakes up with a start. She wasn't in her bed anymore. Where was she? She had no clue. It was dark and the moon was young in its life. While she was looking around, her eyes came across the body next to her. She gasped in fear. She had no clue what happened. She looked closer at the heap of a person on the ground and was covered in a liquid, a dark red liquid that could only be blood. She jumped up in fear, and stumbling backwards, she just ran with fear and was confused. While she was blindly running through the open field, she had no clue of what direction to go. She came to a stop and decided to look up to the stars to figure out where she was in relation to north, south, east, and west. She saw the Little Dipper, and then she saw the North Star after some searching. The sky is tricky. It is always changing, and unless one understands the motions of the stars and the moon's path, one can find out where they are with little issue. The young woman figures out with ease where she is. Well, where north and east are. She headed east because that's as good as any other direction. She was walking for what seemed an hour or two, and in a slight fog. There aren't any streets around, no houses, nothing. She is wearing thin. Her mouth feels like it's a bowl of cotton balls. The walking continues until the morning sun breaks over the eastern sky. The sun comes out early on the plains. Very little hills or mountains. She walks up to a small river. She decided that following the river may be the best way to find someone to help. The young woman starts to change. Her torso was a normal human body, and right at her waist, her body molded into a deer's body. She howled with frustration and anger, and of course sorrow. She had lost her full human body, and she can't go back home looking like this. They would kill her for sure. This kind of bad medicine brought tears of forever pain and sorrow. These screams of sorrow can be heard in the midst of the night. Us natives believe many myths and legends, as we go by our ancestors' words and as the stories they have to guide us. And because of our beliefs, we don't eat black-tailed deer. There's bad medicine when it comes to even butchering this meat. The meat could become rank within moments of killing the deer. So with this, we follow strict instructions through our beliefs. But let us continue on our adventure. 1960s, or it might have been the 1970s. It's a second-hand story that I heard a trucker that rides his rig up and down from South Dakota to Oklahoma. 2 guys riding their horses and having a great time. These guys decided that they wanted to grab some beers and some whiskey and probably play as much pool as they could handle. They reached the ranch of one of the farmers and they stabled their horses. They went inside and got ready for the night of festivities, maybe even have some fun. They smell of cheap cologne and desperation. They climb into an SUV and get the rig down the road to their unsober future. As they rode along, one of the men noticed a couple of women walking along the side of the gravel road. Their car pulls over and the man on the passenger side rolled down his window and asked the ladies if they needed a ride into town. The women accepted, and the car came to a stop. The passenger opened the door and opened the back door for the women to climb in. They went down the road a ways, and they were all chatting and being jovial. The 2 men seemed more interested in their own conversation than they were the 2 women in the back. The 2 women seemed to notice this, and they began to kick the back of the men's seats. The driver started to freak out and pulled over faster than he anticipated. The women shrieked loudly, and yelled in another language at the men, and they opened the back doors and fled into the night. The men looked at each other in wonderment, and they had no clue what had just happened. All they knew was they were giving these gals a ride into town. I guess the brotherhood of being what many think is wrong and unnatural. To these guys, it was their life. They knew each other's ways, and they let each other find their own love in life. A lot cared and shamed the way that they lived. It was their only way to live, because any other one would be a lie, unto themselves and unto everyone else around them. So who are we to decide our neighbor, or our friend, or stranger's love life? But that's another subject. But anyway, these two humans had their own battles to fight, but they were always there for each other. And when these two women decided that these two men weren't going to bring any harm to them, they became mad and aggravated by this. They wanted to punish the male species because they were tortured and died by horrible men who only wanted them for their own selfish pleasures. So as you know, the dear women are on a vengeful streak to take out any male that crossed their paths. My father even told me a story about the dear woman. I can remember it well. My sister and I and Dad were laying in bed, and we asked Dad to tell us something scary. There were a few stories, and the dear woman was one of them. There was once an older native man who had finished up his hunting trip for the evening. He had drugged the deer about half a mile or so, and they finally made it to his truck and grabbed the hook that was laying at the bottom of the ramp and continued it to the back of the truck. He tied the belt around the antlers of the great beast and went over to the hydraulics and started pulling the deer onto the truck. Let the machines do all the hard work. This guy finishes up with his gotten booty and closes the bed flap and gets in and turns the tape player on to some great old tunes from the 50s. While driving down the road, he checks his rearview mirror and sees the shape of what looks like a deer running behind him. He ignores it because it's something that's kind of normal out here, in the country that is. As the man drives, he sees through his peripherals, starting to move its way to the front of his truck. He looks out the wide window and sees a woman running alongside of him. The woman's arms were running at a pace that a runner would have, but it's also as if she was riding on top of something. The man keeps his eyes ahead, refusing to make eye contact with the woman running alongside of the truck. He hears some kind of chatter out the window, but could hardly hear it because of the sound of the blood pumping through his ears. And that was the one thing that he was going to focus on. He knew that if he looked into her eyes, he could be enchanted by her. So he kept a safe pace down the road to his place and didn't care if the dear woman was slamming into the side of his truck door trying to get his attention. The older man knew from stories that his father and grandfather told him of the dear woman that he could get caught and trampled to death by her hooves. If one becomes entranced and gets away, then this man has to go through a cleansing and get rid of the bad medicine. And often, the ending result of extraction of the spirit from this man leads to puking yellow vomit. This is a sign that he has become clean.
Hey everybody out there in Radio Land, what do you know? Y'all ready to get set for some rock and roll? Are you ready to sing? Are you ready to dance? Well, I give you this chance to get up and shake it down, 'cause that booty turns my frown upside down.
A cup of coffee, a donut resting on the dash, windows rolled down. The best part of waking up is Jimmy Poe's in your cup. Crossing the plains with small hills spreading around the countryside. Being that we are close enough to Rotten, that we decide to give Lucy a special treat and stop by unannounced. Grab a bite to eat and either head out with or without her. Guess I'll have to see, huh? As we rolled down 44, my cousin thought it would be fun to count prairie dogs. It's like it was back at good old showbiz and playing whack-a-mole. By the time we got to the diner, he had only a dozen or so counted. It's the little things, you know. I coast into the parking spot to the side of the diner, and I turn the key, and I hear the good old saying rumble to a silence. We get out and waddle over to the entrance and head in with a clumsy clank of the bell hanging on the mid-arm of the door, tied with a piece of sinew. We walk in like we own the joint. I prop my sunglasses on top of my head and pull my hair back in the process. My belly seems to be putting on a performance, with the dazzling wings of a dozen or so butterflies riddling my insides. Ah, young love. We walk down to the diner side of the gas station's mini-mart. We walk to the door and head to the nearest vacant table. It takes a few moments before Lucy walks from out the back. As she gazes across the room, her and I lock eyes for a moment, and I see a smile form on her face. She makes a beeline right over, and I stand, and we hug. "Hey kid, how's it going?" I say, grinning from ear to ear. "Better now that I can see you." "I didn't know you were in the area," she said. "Well, I wanted it to be a surprise, and I'm on an assignment. Boss wants me to camp out here for a few days and see what I can come up with," I say with some excitement. She looks thrilled to have a few days. Heck, I am too. So we both sit at the table, and Hulk is face deep into the menu that he grabbed on the way from another table. "I think I'll have some SOS with a huge chocolate milk, and hold the phone," Hulk says from behind the menu. As we spend time with Lucy, the minutes seem to fly by. We were there for about an hour or so, and I gave her the rundown of the story. We hung out for a little while longer, and then we hit the road. I drop Hulk off by the nearest music store. That way I can head down to the local paper and try to drudge up some water cooler gossip from these guys. If they had anything, bet it'll be minimal. I figured I was gonna get plenty of the minimum. Couldn't even get a straight answer from these bozos. Well, time to go see the local PD and see if they have anything they can tell me. Hopefully it'll be loads better than the fecal matter that these reporters spew in droves. I wind my way through the streets of a small town and pulled up to the PD, and with hope filled in my heart, I walk in and walk up to the main desk and talk to the officer stationed there. "May I help you?" the officer asked. "I can only dream that you will," I say as if I just walked into church looking for the answer for all answers. "I'm with the magazine and I'm doing a small article on the..." I put up my hands in air quotes. "Dear woman incident." The officer looks at me like I have snails coming out of my nostrils. "I don't know what you're talking," he starts to say, and I hold up my hands to stop him. Now, don't peddle this bull of not knowing anything. My roots are from this area, and I just want a straight scoop from someone. It doesn't even have to be the real story. But as y'all like to sugarcoat the stories," I say with slight aggravation. He looks at me. A few seconds pass by and he focuses into my eyes as if we were off in a distant land. "Man, I'm just trying to do my job," I say in a more pleasant tone. He looks at me trying to read me. "If you can't help, you can't help," I say as I start to turn away, and the officer speaks up. "Yeah, a guy was found about 30 feet or so from this vehicle and was dead when the police arrived," he finally said, but he said it so he could not be heard by anyone else. "Was there anything else?" I asked. "Hoof prints? Fur? I already know that it's cut and dry," I say matter-of-factly, but totally BSing my way through it. "Hoof prints," he whispered, "and that's all I can say," he added. "No problem, and sir, I thank you, and now get out of your hair," I say, offering my hand to him. He reaches over the desk and shakes my hand and holds it and pulls me closer. "Now look, I don't want a journalist to get killed looking for a story, so either stay clear of the area or be careful. You say you have roots here, so I have to think you know our local folklore, and know not to mess around with such things. Be careful, and take some cedar with you, and you know what I mean." He releases his firm grip and sits back down and goes back to his work at hand, and exits the station walking like a man on a mission. And am I ever on a mission? As far as I can gather, it really is a good old-fashioned deer woman that is hunting this area. And I really don't think that a little bit of sage smudge and some cedar is going to stop this. Heck, I don't even know if she or even it can be killed. So I'm not even thinking of trying that idea. And my thought is to just get the story and try to not get trampled on in the meantime. I'm fumbling in my pockets for keys to start up the old girl and my hands just don't seem to want to work. I guess just too much excitement for one day. But I produce the keys from my pocket and fumble and find the right key. Finally, I get a chance to take a moment and sit down. I turn over the ignition and I roll on my way. Ride boldly, ride. I get back to the farm after a little bit of a scenic route so that I can get my thoughts together before getting back. My mind starts to go through the past few hours and just keep going over everything and trying to make sure I can remember all that I could in between the details, that some gets lost in the process. Old Sally takes a slight right onto the drive, and she kicks up the dust in the afternoon light. I head inside to visit Uncle Johnny and head out back to see if Hulk is at the boat already. I see him throwing the rest of the gear into the boat. He sees me walking down to meet him near the back of the barn. "You ready to catch some fish?" Hulk says, while loading the cooler in the bed of the truck. "Man, I was born ready," I said with a big grin. "It's been a lustrum since I've been out fishing. This is much needed, and for sure to be a good time, man." We grab the rest of what we'll need for the night and make our way on Indian time. There's a swift breeze, and in this twilight time there's also a heck of a view for anyone who likes to ride these scenic roads. As we barrel down the last little bit of paved road, the truck seems to glide onto the dusted dirt road. We backed up and unhitched the boat into the water. I paddle a yard or so to the wooden deck. I tied to the port side of the deck's railroad stake that was drilled halfway into a 2x6. A few moments later, Hulk comes strolling down. He jumps on board and goes to the cooler and grabs a freshie and throws one to me. He then meanders to the captain's wheel and gives her a crank. She roars delight as I untie the ropes and we set forth on our fishing journey. Hulk turns on the same seat he always starts out on, and he really opens it up once he gets into deeper water, away from the shoreline. Misty winds tear down the sides of his water vessel named Peanut Butter, Sweetwater. We ride about 4 knots or so, and he takes us across the lake to a small set of trees near a cove, but not in the cove, but on the edge. He sets anchor and makes his way to his fishing gear and starts to get ready for the night ahead. We fish for a while listening to some quieter music, which is barely audible. But hey, it works for me, man. Conversations of the night were filled with scary happenings from a bunch of stories that Hulk heard from the elders. We had a few nibbles here and there, but no real bites. I decided at the next real toss that I would connect my glow-in-the-dark lure attachment, just to see if that would work. But before then, I had to charge the glow-in-the-dark lure with my blacklight. It was a flashlight, but it still worked. So I charge it up and connect it to a weight several inches above the hook. I bring the rod to my left shoulder and hold the fishing line in my index finger and toss a snap of the line that just flies through the air with a wobbling glow from the new lure that I just tried out. So I got comfortable and waiting for a bit and, well, just hoping. Our conversation went to the deer woman. Even though we didn't speak of what she was, I told Hulk that I was only about gathering info for the story instead of trying to take out this deer-possessed woman that I don't even know if she can be taken out of, you know? So I made it clear it was just gonna be the recon and, hopefully, not much else. We talk about this for a few more moments when all of a sudden I feel a jerk on my line. Not a nibble. I was so engrossed in our conversation that I nearly lost my getup. "Ha ha! It worked," I said, while I was struggling with the weight of the fish on the line. I reel it in and it's not that bad. Finally, I get it in. A 14-incher. After some celebratory ramblings from myself, I toss the fish in the icy hole that has been ready-made for him and his friends. We fish and we chat and get some fish thanks to some good old glow-in-the-dark plastic. We are still up and a bit groggy this morning, and we both decide to nurse coffee and a sports drink. Gotta keep the nutrients flowing. As Hulk takes time to recuperate, I feel good enough to get my breakfast. So I grab a couple of powdered donuts and down them with a steady sipper that is the wonderful Canadian coffee. I decide to head over to Lucy's and have some real breakfast with her. The ride to Lucy's took no time at all. I rang her right before I headed over to her place. As I get out the car, Lucy is standing on the front porch and waiting for me with a cup of coffee in her hands, as if it were keeping her warm. I make my way up to her and give her a hug, and she hands me the coffee. We head inside and traded pleasantries. She leads me to the dining room table, and we sit and enjoy breakfast that she has laid out in front of us. I tell Lucy what I'm down here for, and we just catch up with each other. Lucy knows that I have to get going because we only had 2 more days to actually get a story, so we say goodbye. And while I leave, my mind is in a fog of the past 3 hours or so. I get back to the farm as if I were a zombie, and I entered the front door and Hook was chilling on the comfy boy, right in front of the TV. I walk over to the sofa and face plant right into it and pass out. I hear the TV going through my dreams and eventually waking me up in an hour or so later. Hulk is still in the chair watching some TV. Or was he sleeping? I don't know. I slowly turn myself around and sit up on the sofa trying to get myself together. I head over to the fridge and grab a soda and grab myself a shower. And by the time that I am out, Hulk is up and moving around. We decide that we will chill out for a few hours and then head out and ride around and do some story searching. Hulk and I get into the car and head on down the road. Gaily bedight, a gallant night, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long singing a song in search of this El Dorado. Over these mountains of the moon and down the valley of the shadow, ride, boldly ride. Hulk and I are waiting for the stoplight to turn green. We ride down the same strip of road over and over, and it seems like nothing is going to happen. So we decide to idle down to the next turnoff and breeze back down to the farm. But who knew that this would be another chance? I guess when we are about to give up and settle for nothing, something happens, and it took both of us by surprise. A giant buck is standing in the middle of the road. The truck's lights catch his red eyes. Hulk slows down a bit. The buck stands up, and Hulk throws on his brights and turns on the PA system that's under the hood and grunted as loud as he could at the deer. And the deer stood there motionless. Hulk let go of the brights, and the wide-eyed buck started running our way, and on 2 feet, and all of a sudden Hulk throws the brights on again and it halts, and Hulk grunts through the PA one more time, and the deer plopped down on all fours and turned hightail and ran the opposite way. We stare, not sure what happened. Dude, what was that? I said if I didn't know already. Hulk puts his foot down and we get underway again. For a few moments, we head down the road and Hulk takes a deep breath. 2 glowing eyes are right behind us. Hulk pushes the pedal a bit more and we keep a steady pace. I flip the visor down in front of me so I can use the mirror in it to look behind us. And yep, there were amber glowing eyes right behind us. Hulk gets some distance. The eyes seem to disappear in the distance, and I look around everywhere and anywhere, and nothing at all. Hulk really puts the truck into gear and heads down the road a ways, and a few miles without anything happening around us. We go a bit further and we see headlights ahead, and it looks like a blinker is on also. As the truck pulls on forward, he stopped the vehicle. The truck comes to a stop right next to the car pulled over to the side of the road. I'm looking around and I don't see a driver or anything, or even a passenger. Hulk is checking the rest of the surroundings. Hulk gets on the CB and turns to channel 18 and tries to get some assistance. At least some help for the person's car who is abandoned. So I grab my flash and I make my way behind the car instead of the front. Hulk can keep an eye out in the area for me. I don't see anything, not much in the way of footprints either. Seconds later, I hear a yell to the right of us. We both turn our flashes toward the scream, and we hear another yell, and this time some leaves move around in the distance. We start to move forward to the sound, and as we walk towards each other, we slowly make our way forward, and I'm covering the 6, and Hulk at her 12. Yet another scream breaks the silence, and we start to sprint toward the sound, and all the while keeping an eye and ear out for anything to try to scoop us up. So we make it to the area where we heard the yelling, and we hear more yelling to Hulk's left and my right. We can see some motion through the trees, and we bolt in that direction. I have my bow set and ready to scroll. We start to slow down, and we get a few yards from the yelling. And it's almost a non-stop at this point. We break through the trees to a small clearing and see a huge doe prancing around someone on the ground and propped up with his arms. Instead of waiting around, I send a few arrows to the deer's head, and the first one connects near the throat, and the second misses, and the third one goes right into the tree right behind the deer, and I let fly more arrows towards body mass instead of the others that failed. All three hit near the heart of the deer, and it started to roar louder than any deer that I've ever heard. And most anything would be down to at least one knee by now. I hear a loud crack from my left as Hulk shoots his 12-gauge fitted with dusted slugs. The deer hits the ground, flying back a feet or few, and lands on its side. It is starting to transform into something, but it isn't really clear what though. It looks way bigger than a deer. Oh, geez. This thing is turning into a freaking bear. I can see it changing forms right in front of me. With a sporadic beam of light as I kept moving, the creature before us starts to roar louder like a bear, and like a woman screaming from the bottom of her gut. The hairs on my neck and arms stand up, and I am not believing all of this. I thought it was a deer woman and not a skinwalker. Jeez. You think we got this? I say to Hulk, grabbing more arrows from my carrier, and load my left hand with them, and notch 2 arrows ready to shoot again. I don't know, man, we may have to sit this one out, Hulk said, and we didn't even know how to really deal with this thing. We fire on the shape with arrows and slugs, enough to kill a real bear or even a deer, but not a skinwalker bear. As I get rid of the arrows that I have in my right hand, I remember that I have a bottle of some holy water. That I brought just in case, you never know. So with what medicine we have, we gotta work all angles. So I dump some holy water onto my arrows. With all the good, positive thoughts in my head for this thing, I sure hope that holy water helps. I fill my right hand with a couple of arrows and grab a couple of more with my left. I hear a deep guttural growl coming from the bear, and I raise my bow and shoot it again and again until it falls, because that's all I can see in my head. So I let forth arrow followed by arrow within a second or two in between. And Hulk had to use another gun because he didn't even have time to reload. So I am out of arrows, and Hulk and I have been counter-circling this bear woman, and she keeps charging at each of us, and we get a few shots off in between her charging fits. On my back, I have a pump shotgun, fitted with slugs and flares, and with my right hand, I reach under my arm and grab the muzzle of the gun and swing it around and pump and fire. Rinse and repeat, man. Seeing the flare burst through the barrel and into the side of the bear was wild. The flare starts to burn its way to the bear, and there's a red glow that pulsates as the flare finishes its job. The bear woman lets out a scream and a roar so loud that my ears are hurting. I send a hail of slugs and flares to the center mass of this huge black bear, with amber glowing eyes, and then spots of embers from the flare's damage. We keep circling, and just as I thought the creature was gonna head right for me, and just to take me out, Hulk lets out a round of firing towards the head of the beast that has just gotten onto its hind legs. I start to stumble backwards and fall over something. Dang it, it's a body. I jump to my feet as fast as I can, and I see the bear turned around and heading for Hulk. So now I'm out of ammunition, and I'm sure Hulk is on his last few. I grabbed the machete that I had in my arrow sheath and brought it out, heading for the bear. I was running as hard as I could, and I bring up the machete with both hands and bring it down with a fierce hit, and crashes into the back of the bear with the fall to the ground. And as I fall, the bear is roaring loud and grabbing with his arm behind itself, trying to take out the machete. The bear woman falls on top of me and tries to turn around. Hulk has the same idea and starts to stab the bear without getting a claw to the face or torso, because that would do some damage. As the bear swipes at Hulk, he brings down the freshly sharpened blade right down through the bear's arm, and then goes for the other arm and takes it off as well. Even though the bear doesn't have any arms, it tries to stand up and has issues. Of course, who wouldn't? The bear woman lets out a long guttural roar, and it starts to sound like a woman yelling in pain. So as the bear stumbles forward to Hulk's reverse, the blade in his hands and is thrust through with all his might, he runs through the bear and pushes the blood-covered blade into the bear's chin, and eventually, with some struggles, into the brain. The bear lets out a jerk and a gurgling groan, and falls forward onto the rest of the machete. We finally head back. I decided to write my story on what accounts happened. I called Boss. I sent him the story over my laptop through a modem that connects to Boss's. He reads it and thankfully he is satisfied with it.
I'm gonna leave you with a thought. How many here are ready for a new, wondrous day? No matter the struggles that we've had, we gotta find a better beginning. So let us ride to that bright horizon, filled with wonder. Let's ride, baby.